And I'm actually, if I'm looking down, I'm just retweeting this stuff. But it's funny,
Okay.
we were just saying that like you actually enjoyed when you said you weighted tables, like
Right.
breaking through the a-holes a little bit.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So, but what do you think it is about? Like, what did you enjoy most when you said that you weighted tables? And how long ago was it? When you was your high school job? Was it a post high school job?
So I came and it was like a long sorted tale, but I did it in college, and I did it in
What type of a place did you wait tables at?
Italian steakhouse. And it was funny because I was like one of there. So it's a little complicated. It's a family-owned place, but they have multiple different places, and
Mhm.
including all over. And I'm from New York, so Syracuse, Rochester,
The
and
home of
Albany.
Dinosaur Barbecue. Everyone knows Dinosaur Barbecue.
It's sort of like, yeah, it's similar. It's very similar in the organization to Dinosaur Barbecue, and so but it was most of the people there were women, so I was like one of I was one of the guys, and so but I went through, and I must have done it for 3 years, and then I went to law school, and we were joking before we started recording that my education as being a server was better than it was being as a lawyer. Just because
Why though? Why do you think so?
you learn to communicate with people. You know what I mean? Like you learn in law school how to not communicate with people typically, and you make these weird, I don't know, automatons that come out of law school, and you're just like, like it's just a very automated, non-creative place.
There's a couple guys over at RotoWire, a couple of the founders that
Yeah.
that were lawyers, and they said what they tell you in law school is 90% of it is filing papers. That it's not what you see on TV growing. It's not Perry Mason. I know that's a dated reference, but it's certainly not that at all.
No, and plus, like you don't teach a lot of the stuff that I learned. I mean, we could do a whole thing. I'm not going to bore people, but a lot of the ethical stuff that you learn that's really tough. It's not. It has nothing to do with being. It has nothing to do with what you learn in law school. You know what I mean? A lot of the decisions that you face are about the quality of the person that you are, and not about not about anything that you could teach in law school. I mean, I can tell you, the hard decisions that I made, I was not prepared in law school for. I was prepared in law and for those decisions through making decisions or through just trying to be a good person. It had very little to do with any legal training that I had, and that's the hard stuff, But so it's funny, like now we were joking that like now I don't, because I was saying before, like we recorded, I'm like a terrible lawyer. I'm more of like what I do is not. I don't view myself as being a good lawyer. I view myself as like trying to communicate with people, which I think is a totally different skill, and
well, it's a negotiation. It's a negotiation,
sure.
and it's most cases don't go to court, right? You have to communicate with the other party and to come to a resolution. So there is a connection there.
Yeah, there is, and it's funny because I had to do literally today's my due date because you have like 30 days after your birthday every 2 years to submit your continuing legal education. So I'd like to cram them in because I'm again. So I'm meeting the deadline, but I had to cram them in. I was like, all right, let's do I have to do like 10 of these things. So what do I need to do? And I was like, all right, let's see what applies to Dynasty. So I was taking agent law and like negotiations and all sorts of other fun things that it didn't really work. I didn't find my Dynasty Jesus in those classes.
What's interesting though is you can use those skills, the communication, arguing skills in trades, things like that, because I still think that one of the hardest things to do in redraft leagues is trade, but it's a lot easier to execute trades because of the chasm in values. Do you still play a little bit of redraft here and there just to keep in the streets?
I do play a little redraft, and I'll tell you, I've noticed one thing that you hit it right on the head. Like you use the skills that you're trained in, right? And so like I have seen a whole bunch of as part of when I started analytics at Dynasty, I did strategy sessions with people. And one of the things that I started, and I still do them, but that was like one of the things that I offered as part of like pre-ordering a book was a strategy session. And I noticed something really quickly about people, which was I saw the world differently than a lot of people did. And people saw it differently than I did. We could come together and say, hey, here's like some general rules and stuff. But different people would play the game differently. And it was we all played. A lot of the differences were what we did for a living. Because it frames how you think about it, right? I, as a trader, if it's redraft or if it's dynasty, it's not particularly emotional. It's very clinical. It's like, all right, I need to accomplish this, this, and this, because that's what I do from 9 to 5, right? That's what, if I'm looking at a case or whatever, that's what I do, right? That's how my mind operates. In its normal state, it's the same thing in dynasty. Whereas you see people that are, that have played football or coach football. Like I have some subscribers that coach football. They see the game much differently. They see it much differently. I have people that are, that are in finance. They see it differently in terms of what they're just looking at asset acquisition, where I'm looking at trying to get product. Like it's a very different what you're trying to accomplish, or how you go about trying to accomplish winning becomes very different based on what you do. So it's a really interesting, and I think if you take a self-reflective look, it'll open up like, hey, here's some opportunities I might be able to exploit, and hey, here's some weaknesses that I know. I think it's a really interesting thing that I found talking with people about dynasty and fantasy football in general.
Yeah, so I'm going to start with a hot take here, because your podcast is basically the analytics, you analytics based. Your website is the analytics of Dynasty.
Yep.
But my hot take is that your podcast really focuses on the psychology of Dynasty, and I think that is the edge. Now, of course, analytics is your baseline.
Yeah.
But what I think is really why I became a consumer of your content is because this is 201, 301, 401. This is not Dynasty 101. And by the way, I was just thinking about, if people are tuning in right now, they're like, what happened to Chad? Like, this is like, I'm like a bizarro looking. I was just thinking that because I watch and I'm used to seeing you on the other side. Anyway, no,
that's funny. I didn't even think about that.
Right. My fans, whatever, our podcast, no big deal. But, anyway, back to so, and I think no better way to illustrate the psychology and how you zero in on that than the poll that you always reference about what's most important thing, or what do you love about Dynasty, and what was it? Just review that poll, and then just dig into that a little bit about the number of people that actually don't prioritize winning.
Yeah, there was a poll that someone put out, and it was basically what's your favorite part of Dynasty, and the options were like winning, building long-term teams, trading, and acquiring rookie picks. And 37% of people, which was actually the most common response, but 37% of people said, I think it was 37%, just over a third, said winning. And I was like, wait a second, what are we doing? What are we doing here? And you'll notice this. Like, this is the funny part is I never, holes in my game, that never dawned on me, right? That the idea of playing something with an intention of doing something other than winning as what I was trying to accomplish was totally foreign to me. That wasn't what I play this game because I want to win it, right? Other people are playing it because they want to, they want to watch rookie videos, right? They want to study stuff like that. That was a hole in my game that I wasn't necessarily appreciating, because when you're looking at a trading partner, we're not looking at the same thing, right? If you find someone that's viewing the game differently, you're not viewing a trade the same way. You're viewing it actually differently. And there's a lot of opportunity to accomplish that. But for me, like that has become something that I've really leaned into. And it's a lot of that experience, that poll, and then sort of realizing that the fallout of that has really impacted how I play Dynasty. Because what I think we find is, if you're in a league with 12 teams, so you're one of 12, and you've made the decision, like, I'm going to play to win the game, right? You might not necessarily have the best team, but you're like, I'm going to play this out, right? I'm going to play. My goal this year is to go and win as much as I can win. You're really only competing with maybe 8 or 9 other teams, right? In any given league, and this is going to be especially true this year.
I was going to say like 6 or 7, but okay.
Yes.
Well, let's say that it's 8 or 9. Fine.
I'm being generous,
right?
Because and people will say and that has really influenced how I've played. And it's been very different than maybe I played. If I were to sort of go back 5 years ago, I don't necessarily know if Jordan from 5 years ago would recognize Jordan from now, because I play the game differently, because I think that there's stuff that we've realized about the market that's really exploitable. And so one of the things is there are And I think in any given year, maybe 8 or 9 teams trying to compete. This year, it's going to be even less because people are so talking up this 2023 class. They want to have early picks. They want to sell veterans for picks. They want to pick early. And you're going to be in a situation where there's really 2 things going on. There's 2 different distinct competitions. One is for the pot of money or the pot, whatever, right? The championship at the end, the belt, whatever it is. And then the other one is actually for the top picks. And you're going to see a chasm in your leagues where people are trying to accomplish 2 different things.
And each week that it's going to open up even more. Like by week, people are going to throw in the white towel in week 4.
Totally. And that's something that, again, you said something earlier that does strike home. And like a lot of what we do is psychology. It's not even necessarily the numbers. Like you can't put a number on that, but that's something that we could see, just subjectively and sort of, not necessarily quantitatively, but qualitatively. You just kind of, see some of these things and you're like, these trends can really be exploited and we can really benefit. Because if you're competing, if you're trying to make the playoffs, right? I say once you get in the playoffs, it's really random. Right, there's a lot of stuff that goes on that's random shots.
You can DFS your way in the playoffs. Like, hey,
100%.
who are the DFS guys min salary that's on the waiver wire that I could stick something like
100%. That. And if you build your team with some of that stuff in mind, like I build my teams with the hope that when push comes to shove, that I have the type of assets on my team that can kick what I expect of them, right? That they can outkick their coverage. Guys like Darrell Williams last year, right? Guys that I make a huge investment in injury away running backs because they can way outproduce what they cost. It's a lot of different things going on. You're playing for the long term, but really it's a week to week game. And so what I do is I treat different parts of my roster differently. At the top of my roster, I'm trying to accomplish elite assets. Give me as many elite assets as I can get. I'll figure out fit later on. I'll figure out my lineup stuff later on, but just give me as the best and most elite player, as many elite players as I can get, and I'll worry about the rest of it later.
What percentage of your portfolio, your team would be? I mean, obviously you want 100% to be elite, but what's realistic? Sure. You've been in the league a few years. What percentage of that roster should be elite players?
So I actually went through and I did a study for AOD for Analytics Dynasty in 2022, and I have I did something that I call the hierarchy of assets, and so that is basically we're essentially looking at what types of players you have on your team. And so I start with at the top of it looks kind of like a pyramid. And if you've ever watched the show Parks and Recreation, there's this Ron Swanson pyramid of greatness. And that's, I stole the idea from that. But it's the hierarchy of assets, and it's looking at, basically, and there's some odd stuff in it, right? There's some of that stuff. It's a lot odds based, but generally speaking, I try to categorize each type of player. And so I look at the top quarterbacks are what I call supermax quarterbacks. I stole the supermax label from the NBA. Not stole it, I borrowed it. And then there's star players that are after that. And that might be the next 20 to 25. And then you get some core guys after that, which is basically fleshes out kind of like your top 60 guys. So
right. Every week starters, no problem. Like you're putting them in your lineup in 80% of the weeks.
Yes. Yeah. And a lot of it becomes all right, well, what's the, if we're looking at, it's a lot of odds, right? So it's a lot of this person's ADP sort of suggests here's what their odds of success are in the future. That's kind of what it is. And so you start looking at it. And for example, I think I'm just grabbing them here. I think there's probably, I don't know, let's say 20 to 25 of those star guys. If I can get 4 or 5 of them, I'm doing pretty good. That's sort of my goal.
So basically four top 36 guys, probably maybe even top 30 guys, right?
If I can do that, yeah, I'm in really good shape. 3 of them, I'm usually in pretty good shape, but 4 of them, is a team that we're probably contending with. And what the crazy part is, and this is what people I just saw this yesterday, where someone traded Deshaun Watson and Kyle Pitts, and maybe I think Delvin Cook was in the deal as well. And they were like, well, I can't contend long term. And I said, well, you just traded away 2 top 30 guys and one that's probably, and I don't know where Cook would be, top 50.
Right, like Dalvin Cook is, I think, is still. You look at the redraft ranks; he goes in the first round, so he's
right. And so you have some concerns dynasty wise, like long term with him. I get it, but you just traded away 2 absolutely premium assets for picks. Again, I like picks, but that is that's the epitome of like, that's treating the fact that you think you have an ear infection coming on by cutting off your leg. Right. That is you're worried that, oh, Dalvin Cook might go down in price. So I got to get it out in front of that. And by doing it, you've like, all right, I got to amputate my leg because I have this ear infection coming on.
Yeah,
it's
and by the way,
be careful about doing that stuff.
Yeah, picks are like, the crack cocaine of Dynasty. Like, it gives the people the quick high. They overpay for them, and then after they make the pick, they just need another one anyway, and they need they're Jones and ready. It's but
totally.
I think a lot of people suffer from, we've talked, you guys have talked about sexy roster syndrome. They want to take a look at their roster and, they look at all these nice young players. I referenced it in an article I wrote for the RotoWire magazine. I credited you guys with talking about that a lot. And then what happens is week 1 comes and the reality, you end up with more Denzel Mimses than you do Amon-Ra St. Browns by collecting these rookie picks.
Totally. And the part, like, it's a delicate balance. And I used to be big into rookie picks. And one of the things that's really,
they're fun.
Liberated is the right word, but I've understood more and more about what rookie picks. And this is, I think, and I actually tweeted this last night. Rookie picks are a means to an end, right? Rookie picks are something that you get to make your team better. Too many people treat rookie picks as the end. Right, which is, hey, I need to accumulate all these so I can have them all, right, so I can use them all.
Right.
And that's been something for me that I've gone through a little bit, and I actually just did I was going back through some stuff, and this is actually my 10th year playing Dynasty, my 10-year anniversary, my first rookie pick, my first
happy anniversary, Jordan.
It's in 2 weeks, so I've been preparing some content to go along with it. But I did as sort of a as sort of a reflection thing, I did the AOD new GM guide, right? It's just a guide for people that are new to Dynasty, want to get into Dynasty. There's some stuff there that if you've played for a while that can help you too, right? But there's
blocking and tackling stuff, right? It gets it renews your fundamentals.
Totally. Yeah. But and it's free. So you can go to AOD, you can check it out.
It's linked in this video, by the way. And if you're listening to this, most people listen to this on the podcast rather than the video. I'll put it in there too when I post it. But it's analyticsofdynasty.com. It's in the video description link. So just go there when you're done listening.
Yeah. And so it's free, and it has some content and stuff that I've used in other books and some other stuff. But it's really like meant to help people, try to make, I've made a lot of mistakes along the way. And what I want to do is to try and help people not make those mistakes. And I've joked that the AOD is basically, I made a bunch of mistakes and it's me sort of atoning for them and figuring out ways that, like, hey, here's why this was wrong. And it's a lot of pattern stuff, right? It's a lot of pattern stuff of like, when you see this happen, don't do it again. One of the things that I would, that I learned from is like, this is probably a down class, right?
22.
Depending on how you measure it, right? I don't think it's that bad.
I don't either, by the way. I'm with you. I like 22. I like the depth of it.
Totally.
I've never been as happy picking at 11 in my life.
Right. And so here's the funny part. And this is the thing that that cracks me up about this is like, I was doing some study of my picks and I had actually drafted. So I am usually Mr. Heavy on picks, right? I usually make a lot more picks than I get. I'm constantly trying to churn picks. But this year I made, and this is the first time this has ever happened, and this is by far, but I made 0.54 picks per first round.
Okay, so on every, you have about a pick every other first round.
Yes.
About.
Right. Which is absolutely abnormal. Right. Well, what did I do? Well, we zigged, we got kind of aggressive, right? And I play in a lot of tight end premium leagues. Listen, I'm going to use my picks this year to make plays in tight end premium leagues, right? I'm going to use my picks this year to make plays at quarterback. I'm going to use and I'm going to use, and I can, again, I was dealing from depth because I typically have a lot of them, right? I might have had 1.2, 1.3 per league, but I'm going to use them preemptively.
Can I ask you something? So like, for example, normally in a normal year, you would just make, you would take your best player available. But when you're in your 2 tight end league or your tight end premium league at 110, you're going to consider a Trey McBride type.
I wouldn't have this year because I was going to use that. Like I would have my play, and generally, yes, my play would have been this year though to use that pick and put it in a package to get a Goddard. Right, that was that I came out of like January, February studying some stuff, and I was like, if I can give a mid first or a late first in a package where that's like the best thing and get Goddard, right? I'm doing that 100 times out of 100.
It's funny.
So yes, about McBride, but this year was like he'll be in play at that. But this year, the play was definitely Goddard for me at that price.
Yeah, this is something that I think that you guys talk about a lot, that a lot of dynasty players miss. And they're always thinking about, how can I cash out my player for picks? You see it all the time on message boards.
Yes.
What's player X worth in picks? But what I like about what you do, and I want you to continue your thought, I interrupted you, but I want you to also hit on this, is the trading philosophy, the mindset of taking pick, adding 2 player to get to the next tier. I mean, that's the only way to acquire a Pat Mahomes, right? It's the only way to acquire, and you just talked about Dallas Goedert. I was shooting for the moon, but it's the way to get, to Najee Harris from Nick Chubb or whoever, your next tier down is. So, and just real quick, I just want to let everybody know this podcast is brought to you by Dynasty Owner. I was supposed to say that in the beginning, but here we go. We'll so yeah, continue on with your thought about what you were talking about the depth of this class and how you're using that to your advantage. And then also the Dynasty strategy of pick to player rather than cashing out your chips at the window at the casino.
Yeah, and so that's always the thing, right? There's always a balance of that too, and you got to be somewhat careful in terms of. There's some rules that I like in terms of trading picks for players. I don't buy QVC stuff on credit. Is one thing that I think about. I don't like to speculate with future picks. That's a lesson that I've learned. And so be careful about doing that. But listen, if you want to pay right now to make a bet, make a situational bet, do it, right? But don't hamstring yourself in the future by doing that, right? There's a difference.
Give an example. Give an example of that.
So if you think, for example, I don't know, that Damian Harris is going to have like a big season, right? Just pick a player.
You know what? How about Juju Smith-Schuster? Everyone thinks he's going to have a good season.
Great. If you want to pick Juju Smith-Schuster, there's a couple of ways you could do it, right? You could give a 2nd round pick. I've seen people use Juju Smith-Schuster as a player I saw 202 for Juju Smith-Schuster and 210. Right, that's insane. Like that's winning. If you're getting Juju Smith-Schuster in a move down like that in that range, that's a great deal.
So you mean that deal? The person went from 2.2 to 2.10, and they picked up Juju as the tax.
Correct. Right.
Yeah,
someone
that's
used
crazy.
Juju Smith-Schuster to trade up into the 2nd round. I'm assuming for probably like a guy like Sky Moore, Jahan Dotson. Right. They probably went up to stop that tier, or maybe they did it for Malik Willis, or someone like that. But that's again, like that's. You just look at who's making whatever that decision was, right? Which side would you rather be on? Like, there's a reason why that person was probably picking for need there, right? Like, that's the funny part about that. So for me, it's very much been like at the 1st round, generally, we have a really hard time picking between wide receivers, especially at the same pedigree. So 1st round, there's a bunch of them. There's 6 1st round wide receivers this year.
There's 6 of them.
There's 6 of them, and then there's
then there's Watson and Sky Moore, who basically are quasi 1st rounders because they were
Right. Yeah. So that's the 6, and then I consider those guys as a tier, so they were 8.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to sort between them as difficult, and we've had a really hard time in Dynasty doing that. Like when you look at the 1st round of ADP historically, it hasn't been, or the ADP of 1st round wide receivers, it hasn't been predictive of success, right? And so what does that mean? Well, it means you're largely drawing random, which is actually something that happens a lot in the NFL draft too, which is people don't like. There's a lot of randomness and noise in the outcome, and so for me, one of the lessons from that is don't try and figure it out. Just appreciate it and play. Right, just play assuming that that's true, that we're going to have a really hard time picking between these guys because we know so little about them, really.
And better, by the way, the great example of that is Josh Doxson, Sterling Shepard, and Will Fuller had higher ADPs than Michael Thomas.
Correct. Correct. I mean, Justin Jefferson was the fourth guy off the board in that class, if not closer to 5 than 3. You know, I mean, you just go back and you look at those things, and it's over and over and over again. So my lesson from that is a couple of things. Don't never trade up for a first round wide receiver. Never trade up for a wide receiver in the first round of a rookie draft is lesson 1. Lesson 2 is if you can trade down and make that bet later, while also adding stuff, if you can make 2 instead of 1, right? If you can do a slide down where you get Juju Smith-Schuster added on and you get the same profile, like that's all stuff that's great, right? That's stuff that I did. That I love to do. And so that's really what I viewed this class is you do that, or you use the first round picks to trade them for guys that are good, that are established players. It's
set up perfectly too, because Jahan Dotson with his early first round pedigree is falling to, you see him go 2-2, 2-3.
Yep.
So if you're in that 1-5 range and somebody needs to have Garrett Wilson, and you pick up 2-2 plus, whoever that extra tax is. This is, like you said, this lays out perfectly for that strategy.
Totally. And this is that's why I love the class. Like if I wanted to sort of sit and bang at 105, like I'd hate the class. But if I want to apply what we know and what we understand through AOD's research and everything, this is a great class for that. And then you look at the second. So I've picked 0.54 first round picks per league. When you look at the second round, I think it's 1.3. Right. And the third round, it's even more. And again, a lot of those third rounders are concentrated up at the top because what did I want to do? Well, what do we know? Day 2 running backs are very useful, whether they present upside, whether they present depth options in terms of like an Alexander Madison has been spot starts a couple of times each year. Like that's valuable, even if things don't fully break in his way.
It saves your season. Alexander Madison saves your season.
Totally.
If you have him every year.
Totally. Except when he plays Atlanta, but that's a story for a totally different day. That we'll talk about it at a different time. But yeah,
you were talking about the trading down into the number of picks you make in and with day 2 running backs.
Yeah. So you're taking, like, for me, it was Rashad White and Brian Robinson, and then TDP Terrion Davis Price, just loading up on them, right? And that's
Zamir White.
I had him in 50% of leagues, like that type of you're taking the profiles. And so the class set up really well for what's historically successful. And so is picking wide receivers in rookie drafts ever a good idea? It's typically not. It's like, if you look at the hit rate for running backs in the first round of drafts, it's like 2/3. If you look at wide receivers in rookie drafts, if you look at wide receivers, it's like 50% maybe. And then you start parsing between some of that, and you can get even better at the running back stuff, just by not taking, bad pedigree bets and stuff like that. Like you can really, you really exploit that and I think become better. And then that's how you build depth too. And that's the funny part is, like we talked about earlier, like, do you just trade for stars? Yes. But how do you build depth? Like you trade 202 for Juju Smith-Schuster and 210. Right, because you're taking the same profile.
That's hard to do, though. I mean, that's a great trade. I love that it actually happened, but as the age goes, I'd love to be in that league. You always hear people say that, So.
Totally, it is, but you'd be surprised. Like, and again, I think depth is an issue of depth. Isn't you need specific players to fill your depth? You need specific profiles. So I'll give you an example. You look around and you look at some of the target projections around the NFL. Everyone's souring on Tyler Lockett right now. You see 120, 125 target projections for Tyler Lockett. And all of a sudden, what might have been a hole at wide receiver, it doesn't matter. You're not taking Tyler Lockett because you want him for 5 years. You're taking Tyler Lockett because you want to fill a production hole on your team
this year, right?
And if you can absolutely, like, Juju Smith-Schuster is a pie in the sky example of that, but Tyler Lockett,
you can get that. You can get that done.
And it doesn't matter the name of it, right? And that's the big thing for me. It doesn't matter the name of it. It matters, or the name of the person. It matters the the quality for me at wide receiver, it matters the targets. Right, give me targets. Right, I'm literally in a startup draft right now, and I said my first 5 wide receivers, I want 500 targets total out of them in year 1. Right, that's what my goal is. And if that's your goal, instead of trying to be sexy roster syndrome, if your goal is to say, hey, what do we know that produces? Right, targets produce fantasy outcomes. Right. And you can look at the world very differently. You're building stars at some of the premium positions, and then taking cheaper guys at positions that are more interchangeable. Targets are fungible. It's a very high end type outcome potential.
Yeah, and it's like take the names off the jersey. Just think about it in an analytical, in a target projection ways. And I always think when you talk about like weaknesses, we're going to talk about weaknesses in Dynasty, and we're also going to talk about taxi squad stashes in a moment. But let's just quickly take a short break for a word from our sponsors. And we're back. Have to do it, man. Have to pay the bills. So it's the price of working on a commercial podcast. But yes. I'm here with Jordan McNamara. Everybody knows him from his work with Chad on the Football Guys podcast, and also you guys are moving to a new podcast feed. So I'm assuming that a lot of people here consume your podcast, and if you don't, this is one of the podcasts that's in Jordan's podcast is one of that's in my heavy rotation. You guys are moving over to a new feed. And are you going to have the new podcast feed on the Analytics of Dynasty website? Will they be able to get that RSS feed in there? Because I only posted in the video link description your website thinking that they can get everything there. If not, I will put that in there. So just explain to everybody what's going on with the podcast in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I'll just so we have a link for it. You can find all our Football Guys Dynasty show. I put it in the private chat for you. So it's just join.footballguys.com/dynasty show.
I'm going to put that in my video description too when we're done.
Yeah, that'll be cool. I should probably put that on the Analytics of Dynasty.
That's what I was thinking because, this way you have one place to send everybody.
Yeah.
And then you don't say, hey, click this link and then go there. But anyway, Jordan's podcast, the Analytics of Dynasty, a website. These guys, they think about Jordan specifically thinks about Dynasty in a different way. I'm going to say it's unemotional. Is that a good way to think about it? Unemotional. You have your players, but you think about it from a very, obviously analytics based, but we also talked about the psychology hacks that you do there. And I always think that some of the biggest mistakes that people make is, again, overvaluing youth, overvaluing picks. What do you think is the biggest leak in Dynasty players' games, even especially experienced Dynasty players?
It's the roster construction. It's roster construction. I think when you look at some of and I was just going back and looking at some research, and we could go back years and years and years and years. And one of the problems that I've had with AOD is sort of how to treat the fantasy playoffs, because I think, if I want to give someone advice on how to improve their teams, I really need to improve their teams in the regular season, because you need to get into the playoffs, right? And so a lot of the concepts that I have, like wins over replacement and stuff, it's a measure of regular season production, because that's the type, hey, listen, if I can get an extra win on my team in the regular season, I can get into the playoffs, or I can go from a playoff team to a bye. So one of the things that I'm super excited to get in the post-rookie draft season of my schedule, because then I can sort of dive into this. But it's this research project I've been thinking about, is like what actually succeeds in the playoffs. And you have the famous Billy Beane quote that was like, my shit doesn't work in the playoffs, right? Like I want to sort of see what does work in the playoffs. But one of the things that you see is I think generally, whether it's in your regular season or whether it's in the playoffs, is when you get the opportunity to have a running back who comes into their lineup and is going to start.
A Khalil Herbert is the quintessential recent example of that, right?
100%. And you've got Darrell Williams, you've had Devontae Booker, right? I mean,
Justin Jackson,
Justin Jackson, right? And you just keep going. I mean, heck, Rashad Penny, right? Like, again, that's high variance, high variance. But again, Madison has been a guy for me that's been this way. And you go back, my logo for my website is literally Latavius Murray's point total. From when he had there was a 2-week time span where he had where he was the running back 1, and it was running back 1 because Kamara was out 2 games in New Orleans, and he was the running back 1 by 10 points. 10 points more than the second best running back. It's just, you're smashing people, right?
Not to get nostalgic, but who was the running back on the Saints? He was on Washington. He was one of those
Hightower.
guys.
Tim Hightower was the original one of them.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Tim Hightower. Like, you go back and you look at, there's all these stories of guys that again, it's super common. So we could go on and on, but you see, I think last year, like 50+% of the starting running backs had top 24 ADPs missed a game. And you start adding that up and just aggregating that. Like, it's like, what you find yourself doing is, if you're running back heavy versus being wide receiver heavy, what you find yourself doing is every week you'll have you'll have options, right? Typically you'll have options. And if I'm playing tight end premium, I think the best way to blend it is take a bunch of tight ends and then take a bunch of running backs, because what'll happen is you'll have an option. If you don't have one, I call them human hand grenades. If you don't have one of the human hand grenades who's a running back that's coming into a starting situation in a week, you can start a tight end and tight end premium. People get worried about that, and they get worried about, well, if I need someone to start, like, you can pick a wide receiver off the waiver wire and start him typically, right? Like,
there's always an Amalada Zacchaeus who's going to get 4 targets.
Absolutely. And honestly, if you're trying to pick between 3 of them on your roster, you're probably not going to pick right anyways. Right? It's just a really hard, like, it's because if one of them scores a touchdown, that's the game usually at that value and that volume. But the running backs, they offer some really good upside. So what I find is that people roster too many wide receivers, right? And they roster them with the mistake of thinking long-term. And you should think long-term, but you should think long-term at the top of your roster. The bottom of your roster, you want to think functionality, right? Whether that's, maybe there's a couple wide receivers you think are due for a big opportunity increase, but there's, like, outside the top 100 guys, to give you an idea, outside the top 100 guys, I might only target at their cost, maybe like 5 or 6 guys a year. And Dynasty. And in my leagues, like, I might only roster 4, 5, 6 wide receivers.
Whereas a typical roster probably has 8.5 to 9.
Right. And the typical roster almost always has more wide receivers than running backs. I joke, and we joke, we have a subscriber chat at AOD, and we joke that you can always tell if someone in the league is an AOD subscriber because they've got twice as many running backs as they do wide receivers, right? And that's I don't want to scare people, but that's where I get to. And again, that's why we're trying to streamline stuff. That's why the target thing is really easy thing to shoot for, right? Hey, if I can get 4 guys that can have 500 targets at wide receiver, I don't need much more than that. And I can figure it out, I can figure it out later on. And, in terms of the long-term stuff, we can just kind of, play that out and deal from depth at running back and stuff. Fixing wide receivers, one of the easier things to do because there's a big supply of them.
You're more likely to have, last year, for example, Boston Scott on your roster than you are Marquez Valdez-Scantling.
100%. 100%.
That's an illustration of what you're talking about.
Darrell Williams like dragged me to buys last year. He averaged like 18 points per game in the 7 games that Clyde Edwards-Helaire wasn't in, and that includes a game where it was like the final week of the season where he basically didn't really play much. like Darrell Williams would drag teams. And again, it was crazy because it was Darrell Williams and then it was Madison. And what you start seeing is when you go back and look at that, those guys, when you sort of piece those weeks together, right? And I say that if you're playing Dynasty and you've got, you've 2 running back spots, or let's just say you're trying to fill a flex, right? And you've got 14 weeks that you really need to fill that flex in the regular season. You don't need to know in May who it's going to be. A lot of times you won't know in August who it's going to be. Heck, you might not know until 4 minutes before the deadline who it's going to be, right? But if you give yourself a lot of options, they'll sort themselves out. And what you'll see is, instead of playing, the 50th best wide receiver, if you're playing from depth at running back, 6, 7, 8 backups on your team and constantly updating them and saying, hey, maybe this guy's not the backup. This is a better situation. Constantly updating them. What you end up doing is you're starting top 15 running backs weekly in that flex spot versus a wide receiver 4, and you're crushing people, right? That's a win. Right. That's at least a win difference over the course of your roster. It backs up. Yeah.
I'm watching the comments come through, and one of them is funny. And this illustrates what we're talking about. Is like, here you go. Clipboard G said, I need to know in May. He's right. Like, there's that itch. You want the answer to your question. It's almost like a physical itch that you need to scratch, and you need to see it in your lineup.
Yes. Yeah. And if you go back and look at it, like I actually did a thing where I wrote down James Robinson. It was Travis Etienne, J.K. Dobbins, Cam Akers, all last year at this point would have looked like good lineup solutions. So would have Saquon Barkley. So would have McCaffrey.
Christian McCaffrey. I was going to say Christian McCaffrey. You know?
Right? Like keep doing it. Like Watson. Right. Like what happened with Watson, Trevor Lawrence, people were depending on Justin Fields, Trey Lance.
You couldn't pry the 1-1 from anyone's hands last year.
Totally. And so you don't, what the secret is that you don't know the answer, and you don't know I think a lot of times is my bet is I want to put myself in the best situation that when the question presents itself, I have answers. The question hasn't presented itself in May, right? The question doesn't present itself in August, and it doesn't really begin to present itself until you're getting into the season and playing, right? So right now, if I don't have, if I can't field a legal lineup, which I can on all my teams, but if I couldn't for some reason, it's not an existential problem, because I can, there's waiver wires, moves I can make, there's trades I can make, and I'm constantly trying to trade for stars. And by doing that, I can fill in the rest of my roster along the way. And what you'll find yourself surprised about is when you're making those deals for stars, you can actually it kind of clouds out a little bit of some of the periphery of the deal. So you can do roster upticks on the side of those deals that are actually really helpful, because that's not what people are staring at. So, there's all that stuff that you can figure out along the way. You don't have a need. You need good players in May. You don't need a flex starter in week 11.
And to illustrate that this year, I was just looking through one of my dynasty leagues that has 30 deep, where they're 30 person roster. There's those waiver wires are barren. Matt Breida, who's on the waiver wire right now, he could be the answer. Right now he's listed as the Giants RB2. We know Barkley hasn't stayed healthy. There could be week 6. He could be projected as a top 15 running back, and he's sitting on most waiver wires right now.
Yeah, for sure. And you think about there's other just if you spend time actually going down your roster. I mean, guys like Deontay Foreman, totally available, right? One of the things that we talked about with rookie drafts, like Hassan Haskins, right in the 4th round of rookie drafts.
This is my guy this year, by the way. If you're in a draft with me, everybody, they know that he doesn't get it out of the 3rd round. I'm a Hassan Haskins because I have Derrick Henry almost everywhere. Right. So, but that aside, I would just take Haskins, like you said.
Totally.
Run first team. A guy who elite bench press, 230 pounds, 6'2", poor man's Derrick Henry. I love that play right there. That he highlights exactly what we're talking about for taxi squad stashes. So let's get into it. Jordan, I could talk to you for 500 hours.
Let's do it.
I love this stuff
all day.
Yeah, and we'll weave in and out of this stuff, but the taxi. Everyone's always saying, who's the next Elijah Mitchell? I think that's the wrong question to ask, because nobody knows. I mean, you can make bets on it, but I think it's more important. The more important question to ask is, who's this year's Khalil Herbert? Who's the guy that we could stash in round 4 and round 5? Maybe let's call it round 3 for our purposes, that is going to have 2 or 3 weeks to save our season when things go wrong, that we could put on the taxi squad, that we should be proactively. Haskins would be a good one, right? So we could start with him. That I'll take that one, whatever. And Haskins is someone that you said is going routinely in the 4th round, but if you have that late 3rd round pick, if you're picking at 310, I think it's perfectly okay to stash a guy like that in your taxi squad, because you're not going to get him at 410. So it's the momentum is building for him a little bit. So who's someone that you're going to have one in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round of your rookie drafts that you could stash in your taxi squad that could present Khalil Herbert like production in a 2-week window?
Yeah, so that's I think a really good way to frame it. I mean, I think in the 3rd round, you can get Tyrion Davis-Price.
Readily. Anytime you want in the 3rd or the first half.
You can get Brian Robinson. This is incredible to me. You can get Brian Robinson in the 3rd round. He has a real draft position median of 301, which is insane. Like the past 10 days.
He goes later sometimes. He goes 303, 304.
Totally. And so those guys, they're foundational pieces for me. And so that would be kind of where I would start. Again, then it becomes a little bit of what's the price point. So I mean, Zamir White after those guys
He's going before them though, right? He's
totally.
like a late second round.
Yeah. That's the problem. He's going ahead of him. And then you get Tyler Algier sometimes floats after them. So
he's moving up too. I've seen him float into the early second round. I mean, I've heard that you guys talk about that, taking these, and that's my next thing we're going to talk about after that is like these non-elite profile guys that are getting pushed up. But yeah, so how about someone that, like you said, that's routinely going in the fourth round that you're actively targeting for your taxi squad?
Keontae Ingram for Arizona, because that's a potential injury away spot that's open. Him and Eno Benjamin could compete for that. That's interesting. Snoop Connor.
Yeah.
For Jacksonville. He
goes undrafted. He goes undrafted in a lot of leagues.
Right. And the beauty about a guy like Snoop Carter is is
it Snoop Connor or Snoop Carter?
Snoop Connor. Well, I keep saying I keep calling him. I
think I call him Snoop Carter. I have done that.
Yeah, I just keep messing it up.
Snoop Connor, the fifth round running back on the Jacksonville Jaguars, was James Robinson. Presumably won't play for the first 2 months at least.
Right.
At least.
And we don't know, like, both of those guys are injured, and so you look at a situation, you're like, all right, well, let's figure out a way that someone could produce their cost. It doesn't take a ton to figure out in Jacksonville, hey, Travis Etienne's not on scholarship anymore. Again, I think he's a pretty good player, but we don't know, right? We don't know what that front office, that coaching staff thinks about him. Well, we know what the front office says. We don't know what the coaching staff thinks about him. So Connor's live outs in terms of that. Again, live outs doesn't necessarily mean I think he's going to finish as a running back one, but there's a potential there that he could be much more involved than we think. Again, and both those guys are coming off injuries in terms of Etienne and Robinson.
James Robinson, right?
Yeah. And so
we saw Carlos Hyde get carries in this. I know it's a different coach, different everything, but we saw a third running back. And there's also a history on this team of undrafted or late pedigree guys having a role, James Robinson.
Totally. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, those are guys that I think are interesting. I think Ingram's really interesting. I mean, one of the things that I can't quit out of my mind is the Kareem Hunt $6.5 million cap figure this year. Mm-hmm. He's due $6.5 million and none of it's guaranteed, and they could save all of it by cutting him. I don't know if they will. Like, they could operate with him on the team and be okay. But if they decide that they want to move on, a guy like Jerome Ford, all of a sudden there's some contract uncertainty with Dearness Johnson. I think it probably gets sorted out, but we'll see. All of a sudden, Jerome Ford could be a guy that
I like that call, because Kareem Hunt actually, it's so rare a running back gets like traded, but he's one of the players that could be traded in a Sony Michel like fashion for a 5th round pick in the middle of the season. Or, if a team, if they see Jerome Ford and Dearness Johnson or ample, good backups for Nick Chubb, you could see someone like Kareem Hunt actually get traded for value rather than just cut or dismissed, so there's a couple options there too. And then I like the Ford call there a lot, because next year, right? I mean, if Hunt is gone and Dearness Johnson's on a 1 year, that leaves Ford. I mean, Nick Chubb's going to be there for the long term, presumably. So then and Ford routinely goes in the 4th round. Like, you don't even have to reach for him. Sometimes into the 5th. Where are you at on Kyron Williams, the running back that the Rams had? That pre combine, he was like RB3 in this class. Tests poorly, doesn't mean he's any less. He's still the good football player he was. I've been getting him a lot. Nobody seems to want him.
Yeah, I tend to not like my archetype, or what I look for in a running back, is big guys that can move and catch. So
can he catch the football? Is he a pass catching running back?
I can tell you right now. I got the. I think he had some pretty good numbers at Notre Dame, but
he's falling to the last round. He's falling to the 5th round.
Right. And so it becomes a question of like, what are you trying to accomplish for it? Do you think he's got a shot at being an injury away guy? Right. If that's true, that has value. Right.
I mean, nobody thinks Cam Akers looked healthy last year, right? So if we think that Cam Akers is already, on shaky ground, Darrell Henderson is just he's locked to miss time. We saw Jake Funk get some carries last year. I mean, presumably Kyren Williams at his, he could be the Khalil Herbert in the sense where those other names that you named, I think those are the better bets, all of them. But now we're in the 5th round of our rookie draft where you're only looking at, wide receivers, undrafted UDFAs, and, Skylar Thompson and Brock Purdy type of quarterbacks going. So, I mean, nobody, like you said, I think there's a stink on him, but there is a little bit of upside on a good offense. That's why Kyren Williams, though he wouldn't be my first choice, I still think that he's an injury away from an injury away, which we see presents itself sometimes.
Yeah, and the best part about him, by the way, he top 25 percentile or so in terms of yards per route run and targets per route run, which are two of the metrics that I look at. So yeah, I mean, you can qualify him as a good pass catcher. One of the things too that I think is important about this is your bet on Kyren Williams isn't a long-term bet, right? Your bet is you think that there's a chance that he's the injury away guy, right? You think that you should treat him as such, right? And that is, if it gets to August and he's on a practice squad, cut him and pick somebody else up, right? Recycle the roster spot and keep churning it, right? Because on the back end of my roster spots, you should be cycling through them consistently, right? Because you get more information. And I joked that last year, like, I might have rostered a different Pittsburgh running back every week as the backup running back.
McFarland, Snell, yeah, Kalen Ballage at one point, right?
Right, and you're kind of like looking at it, and you're like, oh, like maybe this usage means this thing. And again, it was free, so you're just sort of you just keep sort of cycling through them. But that's the stuff that we do. Like I joke, we're like maniacal about it, right? Like you go through each week and you try and figure out what running backs situations are a little bit different, what more information that we know. And then you update your teams, you make your waiver claims and all that stuff. This is what you're sort of setting up to do. So Kyren Williams is one of those guys, like and this is why I think it's really important to go running back instead of wide receiver in that spot, is because you're tempted to hold on to the wide receiver, right? Whereas you'd be like, well, it's it's a longer term bet. It's not, you don't want to make long-term bets with the 28th spot on your roster. You want to make really short-term bets. Like you want that to be a carousel, not something that's set in stone.
You know what you said the other day on your podcast, I thought was this is the way that it hit home for me. Because of course, in practice, I think I know that, but when I draft somebody, I have this bias that I drafted them. I can't cut them. But what you said the other day on your pod, that just think of your 4th and 5th round pick as glorified waiver wire pickups. Yes. I think that made me shift my thinking, because a waiver wire pickup, I'll cut you and drop you 3 times in the same season.
Totally. Right. And that's the thing. And you have to be super careful about here, because again, we're talking about, go back to some of the psychologist stuff. You're super biased on, I made this investment, I don't want to cut a loss. Right. Well, if you understand that 3rd and 4th round wide receivers, their purpose is what their purpose is. If you understand that they are situational bets, right? We were talking just this week about how people make situational bets in the 1st and the 2nd round of drafts, where really what you should be doing is drafting profiles there. And you should be making your situational bets in the 3rd and the 4th, because you don't want to hang on to them if you're wrong, because you're going to be wrong a lot in that range. Like your odds of hitting in the 3rd round are like 20%.
So you illustrate the point here, because all right, just say you're on the clock at 110, 111, 112, and you're looking at Damian Pierce or Jahan Dotson, 1st round wide receiver versus 4th round running back. There's no better illustration of profile versus situation than that, right?
Right. You take Dotson every time, and I'm not even a big
That doesn't happen.
Wide receiver guy.
That doesn't happen, just so you know. It's the ADP is the other way around.
It's crazy.
Pierce is ahead of Dotson.
Right. That to me is it's wild, because what you're doing is you're betting a situation, right? And we actually went back and I looked. 3% of 4th round running backs have hit in year 1 for a top 24 seasonal finish. And that's not good, right? And so like he's rowing upstream, by the way. Like people just want to discount Rex Burkhead, and they just want to discount Marlon Mack. Like, that is not Rex Burkhead is a tough guy to put away in terms of winning.
He's Frank Gore. He's Frank Gore.
Yes.
You cannot kill him off. He's like the Terminator in the original, or Terminator 2.
Yes.
You kill that guy, he gets back up again.
Yeah. And so I think it's tough. Whereas like you take a guy like Dotson, And you're just saying, all right, like, hey, I understand this thing about first round wide receivers is that they're largely random outcomes. We could try and pick situations. I mean, if you tried to pick situations in the Justin Jefferson class, you would have came out with Justin Jefferson as probably having the worst quarterback with Kirk Cousins. And that was when Carson Wentz imploded, Dak got hurt, and Denver's situation all fell apart. Right. So all of a sudden, like, actually Kirk Cousins was the right answer. We didn't realize that at the time, but
he was vanilla ice cream, but vanilla ice cream is, nobody hates vanilla or just plain chocolate ice cream, you know?
Right. And it's better. At least he was frozen vanilla ice cream.
Right.
The other guys
dripping down your arm.
Melted, the melted stuff in the like running into a sewer. So yeah, I mean, that's like, we're not great at sorting those situations out. The key to it is price point, which again, when you're comparing first round price point to fourth round running back, you take the first round wide receiver.
This happens every year. There's a first round pedigree wide receiver that fall, for some reason, dynasty players don't value as a first round pick. This year it's Jahan Dotson. Last year it was Kadarius Toney.
Brandon Ayuk.
That's it. I mean,
so it happens every year. And the funny part is people will, like, a lot of people will say about my strategy when they sort of think about it, it's like, well, you're not taking, you don't have any young wide receivers, which isn't actually true. What ends up happening is we take the last of them. Be like, all right, everyone else wants to try and sort them out and be really aggressive. We'll just sort of collect stuff along the way, And that's one of the things that taking late shots on guys like Dotson and Toney, instead of paying up high in the round, right? That's kind of the way that we balance the roster. So
yeah, and Amon-Ra would be another example. Again, he didn't have the high pedigree, but everyone liked him. Everyone thought he was a second round value wide receiver that fell to the fourth round. But so there's always going to be guys like that. And I just want to shift for a minute to startup strategy, because this is I'm one of these people who do startups since December. Like, we start them. But how many dynasty leagues are you in right now?
30.
Yeah, I'm at 29. I'm at 20. And it's not. And by the way, it's my name is Alan Seslowsky, and I'm an addict. First step is admitting it. I'm not proud of this. I don't wear this with a badge of honor. I wear this with a badge of shame, but I can't help myself.
29. I take that back. 29.
Okay. All right.
So I got to get up to 30. So I'm in the middle one right now. So
I mean, and it's. There is a sense of relief when some of these things fall off. When, like, I remember back in the day, I'd do anything to keep my dynasty together. But if there's one that's kind of like on the peripheral and people are starting to back out of it, I'm like, hey, I'm good either way, because I never want to be the guy that says I want to kill a dynasty league. But when a couple of these leagues fall off, I'm never upset. All right, so startup strategy for this podcast, because these are hardcore dynasty viewers right here. We're always going to assume Superflex. Let's assume some form of a tight end premium, 1.5 or whatever. But how do you, and I know it depends on where you draft in a snake draft, but what's your overall dynasty philosophy? What are you doing? What are you trying to do in the first 5 rounds?
Trade up for an elite quarterback, if not get 2 of them. I just did that. I was at the turn. I drew 112 and 201, and I made a strong push to get into the top 3. And I mean, because those guys make a difference, right? Again, we talk about a lot of the uncertainty stuff. Well, what's the most certain, if we're sitting here and it's May 20th, what's the most certain thing that we can say? That good quarterbacks are probably going to be good.
So that's what I have. My first note here, it was a quote from your podcast. It says right here, good quarterbacks stay good. That's what I wrote down.
Right. And you know what? If you get 2 of them, if you get 2 really good ones, you'd be surprised at how tough it is to be bad. And again, it allows you to make a lot of mistakes. Again, I'm not aiming to make mistakes, but it's very forgiving, right? This is a team where we're in the NBA playoffs right now, and I think a lot of dynasty mirrors what happens in the NBA. And so I love, like, this time of year, because we're post rookie drafts and a lot of NBA stuff. And I get into a writing cycle. So this is like fun. But you look like the team that makes 22 threes, right? They're going to win, right? Like, they can get out rebounded. They can turn the ball over a whole bunch, right? Like, you looked at when Golden State was like awesome. Like, they turned the ball over like it was like they were just given to charity. But
it didn't matter, because they were 2 for 1 and you want to reposition
threes in a game, and it's like, you can't, like, you're screwed. And that's the thing about quarterbacks, right? It's you can have problems, like you can struggle through wide receiver issues. You can have all these other issues, but your quarterbacks are both a floor raiser and a ceiling raiser. And if you have two elite ones, and I have a group that I call Supermax guys, and they're a little bit different, right? What qualifies for Supermax is it's longevity based.
Let's go over them. It's Mahomes, it's Josh Allen. I would put Justin Herbert in there. I mean,
yep.
So who else belongs in that club?
It's Allen, Herbert,
Mahomes.
Sorry, it's Allen, Mahomes, Herbert, Deshaun Watson, and
by the way, he's not thought of in that circle. Like he
should be.
Yeah, but I'm saying in the startups I go to, he doesn't really go in the first round. A couple sharp players will take him at pick 12 or 9 or 7 or whatever, but he goes to that second round a lot.
Yeah, and then Dak Prescott is the last one.
That's right.
So it's a blend for me. It's a blend of what you've accomplished versus what your security is. That's it. And then the last one is actually Matt Stafford. So there's 6 of them. And so I want to have, if I can, I absolutely want to have one of them. And if I spend a lot of my time trying to get a second one, whether it's
Stafford, you don't even need to trade up for though, which is nice.
Yeah. And so it's funny. This one I actually traded up for Mahomes.
What did you have to pay? Because I think that's the thing is like a lot of times I get in these drafts, someone wants my second, my third. Like I'm not giving up all this stuff. They want my first next year. They want all these things. So what do you think is the right price?
I as a general rule, I'll almost do whatever they want as long as I don't have to give future picks. That's generally my rule. That's not. I would be careful about maybe prophesizing that or putting that on a sign because there's a little bit more nuance to it. But generally speaking, I will say yes to a trades like that, even if it seems like I'm giving up a lot when I don't have to give up future picks. So
okay, this is the typical. You have to give up your startup value, 3rd, 5th, and 8th round pick. Would you do that to not swap with him to get the 1-1 or 1-2?
Yeah, It's a 3, 5, and an 8. Yes,
yeah.
I would.
Okay.
I gave up 201, 312, and 512. Which I'm in sort of that 4th, 5th round range right now, and it's really boring for me. I'll just say that. But I got 102, and then I got 702 and 902. And so the trick is for me, the way I view this, the difference between 708 and 512 is not very much. Right? It's pretty small in terms of what your expectations are. And so you're basically trading the 13th and the 36th spot up to go to 2, right? That's kind of how I view this, right? There is a difference between 702 and 512, but it's not that big. And there's a decent chance that the person that you would take at 512 is there at 702. And so that's kind of how I view that. That's not really a difference maker. What I'm really doing is paying that 2nd and 3rd to go to 2 and get a difference maker. And if you did that in existing leagues, you're gonna say yes to the deal typically. And so and then it allows you to do a lot of other things because then fortunately, and I didn't know this obviously when that happened, but thankfully I did the deal because Watson and Prescott were both off the board when I got to 12. And so I would have really been in a pickle of like, all right, now what do I, and then I would have had to really pivot my strategy. And that's not like, I had it written down and I actually write down notes of like, if this happens, then what do I do? And like an emergency break glass situation is Brady, it's Rodgers in the 4th, right? Like I have those in place, but that's not what I want to do. And I didn't think I would have that, but that's looks like what would have happened had I stayed put. So I'm glad that I did it. And then, so that allows you to make a lot of other things. And then the best part is it gives you security, right? Because now I'm at 112 and I'm like, it's too early to take Stafford. Right? I could do it. He would be the next person that I would take, but I don't need to. Let's move down. And then I moved down from 112 to 204, picked up a second, and then I did it again. I moved from 204 to I think 207, got another second, and then I got Stafford. So what did I do? I went up and got an elite guy, and then I sort of knew exactly the price point to fall to for my other guy, for Stafford, and I collected additional assets, right? Like that's the perfect, again, that's like the perfect way to thread the needle, and it's hard to do that, but that's was the goal, and that's what I accomplished.
Though I agree with you about Dak, I think you're on a little bit of an island because in the leagues where I was, picking at the 12th overall pick, the 112, like he seems to be falling there. at times, like 110, 112. So that's interesting too. And then Stafford, because the sleeper or the MFL where we play, it says that he's 34 years old. People stay away from that too. So that's a good way to extract value. But obviously we look at contract insulation to determine a big piece of our value. And with a fresh contract, both of those guys, you're in that 3-4 window. And, I always say, I always laugh when people say, oh, I'm going to have this guy for 10 years. Yeah, we could all be dead in 10 years,
Totally.
like 10, I'd laugh. And it's Dynasty is best played in 2 to 3 year windows. We know that. And sure, with that elite supermax tier that you call them, we could play it in a 4 or 5 year window. I have no problem with saying I'm going to have Patrick Mahomes for 4 or 5 years.
Right.
All right. I got a couple more lightning rounds. Usually we stop this podcast at 55 minutes, but I'm having I'm having too much fun with you, George. If you don't mind, I can keep going.
I can keep going
because I think this is of real utility to our listeners. I mean, you guys have a hard 1 hour limit too that Joe gives you, right? He tries to tell you to keep it. Yeah. And I could, like I said, when your episode ends, I always get upset. So all right, here we go. So a couple lightning round questions. Some ADP things I don't understand. People are drafting the Jets 2 young wide receivers early, but they hate Zach Wilson in leagues. And then the same thing applies to the 2 Miami receivers, Waddle and Tyreek Hill, but Tua is QB 16, QB 15. Explain these phenomena. What's out of balance here with these 2 situations?
Good question. I'm very skeptical of paying up for unproven quarterbacks. And when you look at, I actually did a study from the 2021 edition of AOD, and it was like when you looked at quarterbacks it was this AOD. It was the 2022 edition of AOD.
And just for those listening, AOD is Jordan's website, Analytics of Dynasty. It's linked in the video description below.
Yep. And I come out with a yearly guide that comes out, and it's basically evergreen content, but it studies this sort of stuff. Like, it's meant to understand this question when it comes up, right? So that way we sort of we can go to the library of AOD and be like, okay, in this pattern, this is what's happening. Generally speaking, quarterbacks that haven't hit yet are of this bad.
Explain what a hit is. Explain what a hit.
A hit, I consider a hit a top 12 seasonal finish. Okay. And so if a quarterback hasn't finished with a top 12 seasonal finish, they're much less likely to do so than a quarterback who has finished with a top 12 seasonal finish at about the same price, right? So, for example, when you start looking at ADP, just look at a guy like Derek Carr, or Kirk Cousins versus a rookie in that range, or a second round guy that hasn't hit. And generally speaking, the rule of thumb is that the guy that has done it before is expected to outproduce the guy that hasn't done it before. And there's a lot of things that go into that, but that's a general rule. And so one of the things with a guy like Zach, I actually think Zach Wilson, if you're going to take a bet on like a quarterback 3 bet, see, this is the interesting thing is, right? Like, you talk about team building. Well, what team construct does Zach Wilson fit in? He fits in as a really good quarterback 3 where you have 2 good ones, right? Like, and again, this is the fun part about like when you go build like a Mahomes centric team or a Josh Allen centric team, you could do a lot of different things on the back end of the roster, right? Like, you can do your quarterback 3 can be an upside shot, which I typically don't do, but it can be an upside shot because you're safe, generally speaking, at the top of the board.
Right. So if you have Mahomes, Allen, or Herbert, you can have a little bit more risk and just understand that you might have to cycle through. You might have to pick up a Marcus Mariota, a little bit later on, just so Mitch Trubisky or whatever. Right. I got you. Okay.
So if I go Mahomes, Stafford, my quarterback 3 instead of
all upside. All upside.
Like Derek Carr isn't a good quarterback 3 in that situation, right? Because we're redundant. What I think is useful is taking a shot on a guy like Zach Wilson, because if you're right, like if the market's going to be right on one of these things, he's either not good or his guys are good, right? Like, it's going to be tough for one of those things to be, it's going to be tough for his guys to be good and him to be bad. Right? That's going to be a tough accomplishment. So I think taking him is an interesting shot. Same with Tua. I don't want Tua as my quarterback 2, but listen, if I have 2 good ones and Tua is in a range where it's like, all right, there's a lot of other sameness. And this is what happens in drafts. There becomes a lot of sameness at wide receiver and running back and really at tight end. If you look at some of these quarterback situations and you're like, that looks different than everything else on the board, that's probably a place that you should pick. That would sort of be how I'd sort them out. So I wouldn't want them quarterback 2s, but if I'm strong, I'm willing to take that risk at quarterback 3.
You kind of have to, though, in Superflex drafts, especially like if you're a Dynasty Superflex player and you're playing in January, February, March, April, there's a lot of sharp players in there, or at least players that really understand the value of the quarterback. So, Tua, I saw someone trade up into round 3 for him. Again, that's a little early for my taste.
I saw that this week.
Yeah, it happens because the quarterback run. Every draft is a micro market, as you know. So in some drafts, you'll be able to get Derek Carr in round 4 and 5. In some drafts, he's going on the 2-3 turn.
Yeah.
Right. And so you have to really adjust to that market. So I think in Superflex leagues, you're probably forced to take Tua as your quarterback too. I mean, if you're talking, once you get into your third quarterbacks, I think you're lucky to get Matt Ryan. I think you're lucky to get some of the older guys that are perceived, Carson Wentz,
right?
Things like that. I think that's a little bit more realistic. So are you still comfortable if you have a max contract quarterback 1? Are you still like, what do you aim for at quarterback in these startup drafts as your second guy?
I want 2 elite ones. Like if I can get 2, my goal is to have 2 Supermax guys. If I can get that, so Russell Wilson would be like a really good 2 as well. He's not technically, he doesn't qualify for Supermax because of his contract stuff, but he otherwise would.
You're saying because he's projected to make
established.
Yeah. I mean, but I'm saying he's projected to make on his next contract $50 million a year, fully guaranteed 4 years. I mean, that's what's happening. So you're saying that's a deterrent for you? If he does get that?
So no, it would be good, but he hasn't got it yet. So he's basically, it's 2 years, like kind of 51 million, I think was the last I checked, was kind of like what he's owed right now.
But if he got the 4-year guaranteed, you'd be in on him in that max tier.
Yep. He'd be basically, and the reason that I don't have him there right yet is because there's enough questions about him about like, it didn't end great in Seattle the past year or so. And some of that was probably injury, but listen, if he goes to Denver and plays well, he's going to get a max and he's going to get a big contract. And that answers that question for me. But I think there's enough uncertainty from him coming out of Seattle that you wonder if his injury, is he starting to break down? Is he slowing down? Like there's some of the stuff that is around him that I think is reflected in some of the contract uncertainty. So I'm hesitant to sort of put him in that elite tier, but I have him right after that.
And he's not priced in the elite tier either,
Correct.
Which is great. I mean, if you took Herbert, Josh Allen, or Mahomes 1, 2, or 3, there's a chance you don't need to do a thing, and Russell Wilson falls right into your lap.
Correct.
In round 2.
Correct.
All right. You mentioned earlier you're talking about Jordan of 5 years ago and how you operated in dynasty leagues. What do you think 5 years from now, 3 years from now? You're going to look back on and say, why did we do it that way? I mean, it's so hard to predict because we don't know. We think we're doing everything right, but where do you think Dynasty is going? What do you think we can improve on as players that you're looking into? Because I know you're always forward thinking. So what do you think the next edge? Because really, information used to be an edge. We used to all go to, our favorite news website, RotoWire, RotoWorld, whatever it was. Now information, everybody has it. So what do you think the next edge is, how we can take advantage of our league mates?
Data. And so I think it's a lot of it's having better data. So like, for instance, like we have a dynasty trade database that you can search through and get tons of ideas. And there's stuff in there that, again, that's where the Juju thing came from. And I would have never, in a million years, I wouldn't have thought to make a trade like that, an offer like that, because I didn't think it would be, who was going to do that? But that stuff's like, it prompts you to make ideas, right? Having access to better data. I think expected points is a huge thing, right? PFF has a metric called expected points. And
give me the layman's term. Like, what is an expected point? What's the meat of that metric?
Basically, like if you're targeted on your own 20-yard line, it's not super valuable, right? Because the likelihood you score a touchdown is pretty low, right? So it's not that.
So it's going to have a low expected point of if 70% of your targets are, nowhere near scoring position.
Correct. And then you look at, but what happens is you see things. So you'll see things like, for example, the Jamar Chase. Right? Jamar Chase is like a touchdown over, like he's like 7 points over his expected points last year. And most of that is long touchdowns. And so you look at that situation and you're like, okay, there's an efficiency here that's just not going to that's probably not going to happen. We don't have a ton of sample on, I think it's like 3 or 4 years old, that stuff, but you just look at stuff that doesn't repeat, like fluky long touchdowns tend not to repeat. And so you get a lot of concern about that for a situation like him. So that's something that I think is there. I think there's better quarterback stuff that we'll probably learn too. I don't necessarily know what that's going to look like, but I have a feeling like we'll get to that, some of that stuff here going forward as well.
All right. We're going to wrap up here in a minute, but so we talked about having quarterbacks is such an advantage in these Superflex leagues. That's why, in these drafts, these rookie drafts I've done, I think, and I'm sure there's other people that are high on Kenny Pickett. Now, you love the first round draft pedigree, usually outside the top 10 gets a little shaky. You could end up in Dwayne Haskins territory. People aren't as attached to it, but don't you think that, pour one out, right? But don't you think that people should be considering him as pick 2 or pick 3 in Superflex leagues, just based on, you drive the car off the lot, and so often it depreciates in value. Quarterbacks, if Kenny Pickett's bad, I'm saying if he's not a good quarterback, he's likely to get 2 years worth of starts.
Right. I mean, what's rare, right? What's rare in this class? First round quarterback.
Yeah.
And you just simple supply and demand. When there's a small supply of something, it should be more expensive. And for me, like, I was at 105 and I was like, I think the answer is Kenny Pickett. Like, I don't have a great,
it's higher. I think, I would take him as 102, 103 if
Yeah, because I mean, if that's your position, I respect that, because I think it's different. But if you're looking at it like London, they look a lot of, I can't really pick between the wide receivers. Like, the only thing that's different after Hall and how you think about Walker is Pickett, right? Like, I actually think it's very different, because he's probably a lesser version of Mac Jones, would be how I think about him. He went later on in Mac Jones in a worse class. But like, there's no other guys, right? Like, he's the guy. And so you think about like that from a price point, like, he's probably more expensive this year, but that's probably a good reason why you trade that pick for an established quarterback.
Right. But think about it like this. This is how I was positioning it to people. If you were to rank, if somehow magically your software allowed Kenny Pickett to be ranked as a wide receiver, have wide receiver eligibility, and you're doing your weekly rankings, your seasonal rankings, what Kenny Pickett playing quarterback would be wide receiver, what? 16, 14, right? I mean, if he has a bad fantasy week, it's going to be 13 points, 11 points, 15 points. And that's now, if he has an average week, he's going to have 17, 18 points. And if he has a good week. So that's what I'm saying, is that when you have the ability to, one, have an insulated player, and a player where, this happened with Daniel Jones. I was taking Daniel Jones in rookie drafts at 1.6, 1.8. And what I realized is most rookie drafts, he was going in the middle of the second round, Totally. And he was a better example because he was a top 10 quarterback. And look, we're still in year 3? Was it year 4 for him? And he hasn't played well from an NFL standpoint. And he's still, going to be a player that you're going to be putting in your lineup if you're in Superflex leagues. So
yeah.
All right. Couple other things, and we'll end it here. Lightning round stuff. I'm having some decisions to make. I'm just hoping, these are totally selfish decisions, but people need to, the Velus Jones, how he's basically a grandpa at 25 years old. Are you taking him in rookie drafts? I mean, he's probably one of the more likely guys to produce when you talk about round 3 wide receivers. I know you're going running back in most of those spots, but I have
a decent share in like round 4, because you just look at it, you're like, all right, he's a day 2 wide receiver.
That's
comparing against, so I should have a decent amount, even though that's not typically something I do.
Okay. So, again, we know that running backs are your preferred way to build your roster around 3, round 4, but sometimes you're going to be forced to take a wide receiver. Who are some of the other wide receivers that you're looking at? Khalil Shakir, like, give me 1 or 2 names that if you have to take a wide receiver there, even though that's not your preferred method, that you're okay taking it back. Because, you end up with a lot of Josh Palmers where you don't even know what to do with them the second year, but so who would be a couple guys?
He's basically the guy. Justin Ross, I've done a bunch in the 3rd round too, just because I think he's a clear answer. I'll know one way or another whether or not he's going to be productive. So those have really been the 2 guys that I've been doing that with this year.
All right. Yeah. I'm with Jordan McNamara, Football Guys, Analytics of Dynasty. All his links in the video description below. And if you're listening to this podcast, I implore you, if you want to just become a better Dynasty player, I would listen to Jordan's podcast. You'll instantly start thinking about the game differently. I'm doing all this for you, Jordan, because you can't say it yourself. But Jordan's podcast is moving over to a new feed. Previously, they were on the Football Guys podcast feed. They're, I think, smartly moving it over. Fine, you get the bump of the mass subscribers on the Football Guys feed, but this is you guys have built enough now where it's time to carve out your own little thing. So I'm going to put the link in the video description below of the new feed. Jordan will still be for 2 more weeks until in the month of May on that podcast, on the Football Guys podcast feed, but he's going to have his own starting on June 1st. I said I did all the promo for you, right?
Yeah, you did it. It's excellent.
You can tell I pay attention, right?
Yeah, you do. It's working. That's good to know. It's good to know we're working. Yeah.
No, totally. Yeah. And you know what I think is, I think you're also the podcast you do with Chad is, I think a lot of content creators are consuming your content too. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that you're helping everybody. You're elevating the game of Dynasty. I mean, people that I have on this podcast, when they gave me the Dynasty podcast on the RotoWire feed, I just said, like, I'm a fan of podcasts. I just want to have the guys on that I want to talk to and I want to ask the questions to that I would ask you during your podcast.
Yeah.
Yep. What else do you want to promote before we get you out of here? Give them your Twitter.
At McNamara Dynasty, and I have it linked in there too. I did the new GM guide too. So if you're new to Dynasty or you're just starting Dynasty or anything like that, go check it out. It's free. And then you can go get the 2022 edition of AOD. That'll really help you as well. Again, I have Dynasty Daily Podcast at analyticsdynasty.com. You can check that out with a subscription as well.
Yeah, Jordan, this was fantastic. We're going to hopefully have you back this year when, in between, once you settle into the season and get some more kind of updates on strategy midseason. Because I think what happens with Dynasty podcasts is we love the off season, right? Because all the off seasons where all the movement happens, but there is edge to be gained in season, especially as what we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, teams throw in that white towel a little bit too early, the 2 and 3 teams, the 2 and 4 teams. So there's some edge to be had there. All right. Jordan and I are going to go now, but we're going to figure out a trade cast that we're going to do. So we might be back. I'll retweet it from the RotoWire feed. Stay tuned. If you're on social media, I'll be retweeting. Jordan and I are going to come back and talk some trades. It may not be live, so we'll figure it out. Do we do it live, Jordan? Or
it'll be next week. It'll come out next Thursday.
Okay. All right. So I'll link all that stuff on our social as well. All right, buddy. We'll see you next week with another RotoWire Dynasty